evening. It's 8 o'clock in Yerushalayim. We've abandoned summer daylight savings time here, and it's time to begin our regular halacha shir here at WebYeshiva.org. Our topic for this evening is gelatin. When I first saw the lovely graphic presentation which our graphic artist prepared for the screen, I thought I was in the wrong shiur. I thought we're going to be talking about recreational drugs for a moment, but then I realized, oh no, this is probably a product which is made with gelatin, as an example. Well, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, in any event, before I begin with the material, let me make some preliminary announcements. If you want to ask a question during the class, feel free to type your question on chat. I will see the question on my screen. Then I can incorporate the answer to the question in the ongoing shiur. I know that some of the participants are not from English-speaking countries, and therefore, if you find it easier to type a question in another language, on peut poser des questions en français. Se pueden hacer preguntas también en español. Man kann Rückfragen auch auf Deutsch stellen. Toji por Ruski, también Português. Well, I have a number of other languages as well, so let me know if you want to correspond in a different language. Now, the basic problem is that gelatin is often produced from non-kosher animal parts. It can be made from it can be made vegetarian from vegetable substitutes, something like agar. It can also be made from kosher fish, and of course it can be made from kosher animals. And a cow that was properly shechted, properly slaughtered, one could make gelatin out of that. But in the commercial market, the vast majority of gelatin out there is made from non-kosher animal sources, and it's used in a wide variety of products. And in concept, glycerin is not exactly the same thing as gelatin, but the manufacturing process is in concept. It's from the halachic point of view. The production of glycerin is the same. There's more glycerin on the market, which is made from vegetarian sources, but still the same technical halachic issues apply to glycerin as to gelatin, and both are widely used as additives in food and beverages all over the world. Let's now begin with the halachic sources dealing with this issue. The issue begins with the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ashkenaz annotator of the Shulchan Aruch. We're talking about 16th century Poland. He says, or hakeva, the stomach lining of the cow. Cow is a ruminant. The digestive system is a little bit complicated in cows, but that part of the digestive system, which is called the keva, the stomach, one of the stomachs anyway, of the cow. You can take the stomach lining, lif'amim molchim oto. Sometimes what the Jews do is they take the stomach lining of the cow, they salt it, miyabshim oto, desiccate it, make it very, very dry. It takes a long time for it to dry out. Salt it, dry it thoroughly. Naaseh ke'etz, it gets so dry, thoroughly desiccated, it's like a piece of wood, no moisture at all left in it. Mimalim oto chalav, and now you fill the cow's stomach with milk. You pour milk into the cow's stomach, and that turns into cheese. That is the way they made cheese through the millennia. I think everyone knows that in the stomach lining of the cow, there's an enzyme. In Hebrew, it's called miso, rennet in English, and that's what curdles the milk and gets the process started for making cheese. And nowadays, the cheese is still made in concept in the same way. Of course, cheese manufacturers today, commercial manufacturers, want the product to be standardized. Right? The customer who buys a certain brand of cheese is expecting a certain color, a certain texture, a certain taste, and the cheese manufacturers, of course, want to standardize their product so it always comes out the same, meeting the customer's expectations. And this old method of pouring the milk into the stomach and letting it curdle there and turn into milk, it doesn't always give you exactly the same results. Some cows have a little bit more rennet, some cows have a little bit less rennet. There are other chemicals involved which vary from cow to cow. The cheese is not a standardized product. And therefore, nowadays, what they do in commercial cheese production is they take the stomach lining, they chemically extract the miso, chemically extract the rennet, the enzyme, standardize it in a little laboratory, little laboratory, and then that gets added in precise measure to the milk in order to start the cheesing process. Then you get a standard product, always look the same, always taste the same, and well, for commercial reasons, that's very important. But in concept, it's all the same. Cheese is made with a product of the cow, whether you do it in a lab, with a purified substance which has been purified in the laboratory, or you do it in a stomach lining of a cow, it's all the same. Mutter. Anyway, this is permissible. Why is it permissible to mix milk and meat in this way, even though the cheese is likely to end up in pizza and get cooked? The milk ingredient and the meat ingredient is likely to get cooked together to make pizza out of it or something. Why is all of this okay? Because the stomach was desiccated, was dried out thoroughly, not any moisture in it at all. The stomach lining, the stomach lost its status as flesh when it was dried out and became like a piece of wood. At that point, the stomach lost its status as flesh, as meat. There was no meaty moisture in there at all, and therefore this stomach is no longer called a piece of meat, and therefore no objection to making cheese, even if it's going to end up getting cooked, as in a pizza. But everyone knows that milk and meat together, which is not cooked, is only a rabbinic issue, but cooked together is a Torah issue, and it's even more serious. That's also okay. What have we learned? An immensely powerful principle. According to the Ramah, food, in this case, a piece of meat, not the stomach of a cow, food which has been so thoroughly dried that there's no moisture in it at all. This piece of food is turned into something which resembles a piece of dry wood. The food loses its original status. If it was treif, it's no longer treif. If it was milchik, it's no longer milchik. Whatever the original status was, whatever the original halachic status was, that halachic status has been lost. Now it's not food at all, and therefore the original halacha pakah left the piece of food, no longer has the status. Well, this is a very, very, very interesting principle, which has immense ramifications. According to this, the Shvus Yaakov, and I bring you only the most weighty, most important halachic sources, which have the greatest impact on the thinking of the rabbis through the generations. Well, there's going to be one exception at the end of this series, but I'll tell you about the exception when we get to it. According to the Shvus Yaakov, blood from a goat, dam tayish, blood from a goat, not a goat which is properly shechted, a goat that the non-Jews killed in their way, and therefore the goat is prohibited. And the truth is, even if the goat was properly slaughtered, the blood is prohibited. Let's speak for a moment about the prohibition of blood, even if the animal is properly slaughtered. As far as the prohibition of blood is concerned, we're talking about blood sheparash le'achar mitah, the blood which moved after the animal died. That's the blood which the Torah prohibits us from consuming. Blood which, after the animal is butchered, and blood oozes onto the butchered surfaces, that's blood which moved after the animal died. That blood must be removed before cooking, before consuming the meat. But blood which did not move between the time of slaughtering and the time of consumption, the time you eat the meat, there's no particular need to remove that. And indeed, uh, you don't have to be a great biologist to know that our methods of soaking and salting, our methods of removing blood from the meat, do not remove the blood from the interior of the meat. But that blood is truly permitted. In any event, here we have a goat, and the blood was collected. I don't know how they collected it. Maybe at the time of slaughter, someone collected the blood in a vessel that got the blood that was gushing out after the animal was slaughtered. In any event, you have a container full of goat blood. Nikrash, the blood was allowed to dry out, solidified. First, blood coagulates. Well, of course, if you have an injury, a lesion, and you're bleeding, of course, you're going to hope that your blood coagulates. That's going to stop the bleeding. When blood meets oxygen, that happens. Hopefully, it doesn't happen very much in your body, but it surely should happen if the blood is exposed to oxygen. The blood coagulated. Nityabesh, in the course of time, it dried out. Well, now we have totally dry, it's like a brick, totally dry goat blood. It's like a brick, no moisture at all in it. Afilu lechole she'ein bo sakana. Well, if this is the medicine which a sick person needs, you don't require a life-threatening situation to permit someone to eat this blood. Just, your ordinary garden variety sick person, no one thinks he or she is going to die. Just a garden variety, simple disease. No one thinks there's any threat to life here. This blood is permitted because the moisture has been removed, and the blood therefore acquires the status of eitz ba'alma, piece of wood. The original halachic status of being prohibited blood vanishes, and all is well. Well, the Ramah taught us that in the Shulchan Aruch on the previous screen. The Shus Yaakov teaches us the same thing on this screen. If we come down to the 20th century, the Aruch HaShulchan in the 20th century says the same thing. So from the co-author of the Shulchan Aruch in the 16th century, the Ramah, down until the 20th century, the poskim are agreed that drying food until it has no moisture in it at all, and it's just eitz ba'alma, it resembles a piece of dry wood, well, the original prohibited status just vanishes. Oh, now this is an important idea. Let's see what the Mishnah Brura has to say about this. I don't have to tell you how important the Mishnah Brura is. Hard to point to a more weighty halachic authority in the 20th century. Mishnah Brura published a shade over 100 years ago. First volume came out in 1910, 1911, around then. Eventually, 6 volumes were published. In any event, these are the words of the Mishnah Brura. First, the context. The Mishnah Brura says what he's about to say. He says it in the context of talking about the correct bracha to make on different things you smell. Some things you smell are kinds of grass. They get one kind of bracha. Some things you smell came from trees. You get another kind of bracha. As with food, there are different brachot for different kinds of smells depending upon what the smell came from. Smell, you know, languages are so. In English, the word smell, unless you specify what you're talking about, if you just say smell, people's first thought is you're talking about something that smells bad. It smells. That means if you don't specify that it's a good smell, people think you're talking about something that smells bad. You know, that's not true in every language. In German, for example, if you say es riecht, it smells in German. Es riecht. Well, the assumption is that you mean that it smells good, unless you say otherwise. So maybe I shouldn't use the word smell. Scent might be a better word. Scent implies that we're talking about something that smells good. You have to make the right bracha. So now the Shulchan Aruch turns to the question of the bracha on musk. Now, musk is a perfume, very common perfume ingredient. It's something which smells good, and in commercial perfume production, it's a very common ingredient. Typical perfumes have 15, 20, 30, 40 different ingredients in them. Very typically, musk is one of the ingredients in any commercial perfume. It adds a good note. It adds a good scent to the perfume. And the Shulchan Aruch is very very interested in knowing the correct bracha if you're going to smell some perfume made with musk. Now, the reason this is such an interesting topic is because musk in Europe, musk is not produced in Europe. Musk comes from an animal. It's an animal product, but the animals are not native to Europe, and indeed do not live in Europe even today. The animals from which the musk is derived, those animals live in the mountains in southern Asia, places like the Himalayas. In southern Asia, in the mountains, that's where the musk animals live, and that's where the musk is produced. And then it gets shipped all over the world. It's terribly valuable, like per gram, it costs a fortune. But you only need tiny amounts to add to any perfume, but it's really very expensive. It gets exported all over the world from southern Asia. And since these blocks of musk were imported into Europe, it wasn't exactly obvious to them, where did this stuff come from? Did it grow on a tree? Is it a kind of grass? Or where did it come? We have to know the correct bracha if you're going to smell it. And the Shulchan Aruch is very interested in this question. The Mishnah Brura on that passage, and I don't have to mention the exact source I'm drawing this from, because on the screen you always have the very precise sources that I'm using if you want to look up the source and see the context and check out my spelling errors, since I'm not a very good typist. The Shulchan Aruch the Mishnah Brura is interested in an ancillary, in a corollary, in a side issue. The side issue that the Mishnah Brura is interested in is what happens when a few drops of this musk is added to the food to give the food a good aroma. Now, nowadays, the truth is, I don't know any recipes which call for a drop of musk to be added to the recipe, but that was quite common in early modernity, that a drop of musk would be added to the food to give the food a good aroma. Well, are you allowed to do that? From the kashrus point of view, are you allowed to add the musk to food that you're cooking? Now, this musk that the Shulchan Aruch uses the word musk, which is the same word that we use in English. Mishnah Brura begins by explaining what this musk is. Lashon Laz, in the non-Jewish language, musk is called pisum. Pisum. What on earth is pisum? Well, pisum is a Polish word, which means musk. And the reason the word is interesting is because the Polish word seems to be derived from a German word, bizam, which in turn is derived from a Latin word, bisumum, which in turn is derived from the Hebrew bosa. Now, I know that there are a lot of people out there who have extravagant claims about a large number of English words, French words, German words, and so forth and so on, all being derived from Hebrew. I know that whole books have been written with extravagant claims about European languages having sources in Hebrew. I know about that. But sometimes it's really true. Sometimes there are European words which truly do come from Hebrew, and it's usually surprising. But and this is one case. I'll give you another example of a surprise which truly does come from Hebrew. The English word magazine, very common English word, magazine, use a similar word appears in other languages. Magazine is a word which truly has its historical origin in Hebrew. And the Hebrew word out of which the word magazine in English eventually came is the Hebrew word machsan. Machsan is a storage place, a warehouse, a storage place. If you know French, you know that if you pronounce the word magazine in the French way, magasin, it means a store, a storehouse, a storehouse, which is exactly what a machsan is. The word went from Hebrew into Arabic with a slight change in pronunciation in Andalusia, in southern Spain in the Middle Ages. But Andalusia in southern Spain in the Middle Ages was Arabic speaking until the Reconquista in the 13th century. In Andalusia in southern Spain, the word went from Arabic into Spanish. From Spanish, it went into medieval French. From French, it went into English. And if you trace the history of the word magazine all the way back to its origins, you will get machsan in Hebrew. Now, this leads to a curious result. In modern Israeli Hebrew, the word machsanit is used for a magazine of ammunition for a rifle. Rifle has an attachment which holds the bullets. The attachment which holds the bullets for a rifle in English is called a magazine, and in Israeli Hebrew in the army they call this a machsanit. Well, of course, the modern Hebrew word machsanit is just a translation of the English word magazine. So the word which started in Hebrew went to Arabic, from Arabic into Spanish, from Spanish into French, from French into English, has now come back into Hebrew from English and is now used again. Some words have curious origins, and some of them truly are of Hebrew origin, and this is one of them. In any event, just as your typical Israeli soldier is totally unaware that when he talks about the machsanit, the ammunition magazine for his rifle, totally unaware that this is truly an ancient Hebrew word which has made its way back into modern Hebrew by a circuitous route, just as the typical Israeli soldier is unaware of this whole story. Similarly, the Mishnah Berurah seemed to be unaware that when he translates musk using the Polish word pismo, he apparently was unaware that this is truly, he's translating it back into Hebrew using a word which was truly of Hebrew origin. Well, in any event, what is the halachic status of musk? Bisamim zeh, this smell, this scent, this perfume, this musk substance, is derived from animals. And in Southern Asia, they didn't slaughter the animals in a kosher way. Surely the meat was not kosher. Lefichach, therefore, mevarech alea borei minei besamim. This perfume does not grow on the ground like a grass. This perfume does not grow from a tree, and therefore, as with foods, which do not grow from the ground and do not grow from trees, get the general bracha shakol nihiyeh bidvaro. This perfume gets the general bracha borei minei b'samim. Very nice. Okay, so if you're interested in the laws of brachas, you've just learned the correct bracha on musk if you smell it. But then he adds, da, you have to know, musk zeh yesh omrim sheba mezeyas chama, mezeyas chaya. We here in Eastern Europe, in the beginning of the 20th century, have heard all kinds of rumors about exactly where in the animal this comes from. In fact, I really don't know very much about animal anatomy, but I just copied a picture here from Wikipedia, which I suppose is correct, and the arrow points to the rear leg of the musk deer, pointing to where the gland is that produces the musk. And after the animal is slaughtered, the gland has to be removed in its entirety, allowed to dry, and then gets shipped all over the world as musk. Well, I know that because I looked in the Wikipedia article, which I suppose is correct. But in Eastern Europe, for some reason, the rabbis, the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox rabbis in Eastern Europe were really quite firm, and they refrained. Back in the beginning of the 20th century, in the days of the Mishnah Berurah, they did not use internet at all. They did not use Wikipedia, so they had no access to this information. They didn't know exactly how the musk was produced. Yesh omrim, some people say it's a secretion of the animal, which happens to be true. Yesh omrim sheba midam shel chaya achas. Some people say it's the dried blood of a certain animal. Shemit kabetz b'tzavaro. Some people say it's blood, which gathers together in the neck of the animal. People disagree. Some people say it's a secretion that happens to be correct. It comes from the gland in the back of the legs. Other people say it's the blood of a certain animal. I don't know what's true. They didn't know. And according to this understanding, either it's a dried secretion of a gland, or it's dried blood from a certain animal from Southern Asia. Some people say that it's prohibited to add musk to the food in order to give the food a good smell. You're not allowed to add it to the food, because the animal it came from, you're not allowed to eat. So you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to add it to the food either. Well, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Harbe poskim matirim. On the other hand, many rabbis disagree, and they say, you want to add it to the food? Go ahead, add it to the food. And the reason for the lenient opinion, the rabbis who say you're allowed to add it to food, is because azlinen basar hashta, we go azlinen, we go basar achare, we go after now, we go according to now. True, this used to be blood or some part of the animal, but now it's just like dried wood and therefore lost its original halachic status. Bottom line, the Mishnah Berurah is telling us that the rabbis are divided. Some say, since it came from a prohibited source, you're not allowed to add it to the food. Others say, since now it is no longer prohibited because it has been transformed into perfectly dry eitz ba'alma, like a piece of wood, no moisture in it at all. Since now the original prohibition has vanished, you can add it to the food. Rabbis are divided on this question. Hashta lav damhu. It's no longer blood because It's totally dried, no moisture. It's like wood. Ella, Afram Alman. Now, he uses a different word. He doesn't say it's like wood. He says, no, it's like dust. Like dust. That's all it is. Notain reach tov, but it has good smell. It has good smell. Ayin be'elia rabba, shemitzaded laharot kedivrehem. And he quotes the most important posek, the Elia Rabbah. His name was Rav Elia Shapiro from 17th century Lithuania. It's the most important name on the lenient side, permitting using the musk in food. But Prima Godim, Yosef Ta'omim was his name, 18th century, in the back of the standard editions of the Shulchan Aruch. He tends to say, Yesh l'smoch al divrei hakel. We should be lenient and follow the lenient opinion. Af l'chatchila. We're not talking about b'diavad because it's going to be bottle b'shishim or something like that. But l'chatchila, you would say, well, it's straight out to add it to the food. B'yeshishim connected b'tavshil, as long as we're talking only about a little bit of it in the food, and there's no possibility of it being the majority in the ingredients. Now, if you check out the wording of the Prima Godim, which the Mishnah Brura is relying upon here, you'll see that the Mishnah Brura, in his original wording, is basing his thinking on a very important principle. The principle is where there is a suffix, where we do not know what the halacha is, there's a suffix. The reason there's a doubt, the reason we don't know what the halacha is because the great rabbis disagree with each other and we don't know which side is correct. Since we don't know which side is correct, as long as you're talking about something which is only a rabbinic prohibition, one should follow the lenient view. Where there is a suffix, a doubt regarding the halacha because the great rabbis disagree with each other and we can't figure out which side is correct. If we were talking about a Torah prohibition, we would be strict. But here, since cooked blood, well, it sounds unappetizing, I know, but since cooked blood is only prohibited midrabanan, raw blood is a Torah prohibition to eat. Cooked blood is a rabbinic prohibition. Bottom line, since we're talking about something which is only a rabbinic prohibition, it's correct to rely upon the lenient poskim. Okay, that's the approach of the Prima Godim, which is embraced by the Mishnah Brura. The bottom line conclusion is where there is a controversy amongst the poskim, and at worst, we're talking about a rabbinic prohibition, it makes sense to grasp the lenient view. The reason that the path from the original Ramah that we started with today in the Shulchan Aruch to the leniency here, the reason why the path is not a smooth, obvious one, is because the Ramah was talking about the stomach lining of a cow which was slaughtered in a kosher way, and here we're talking about stuff which starts out being prohibited. That's why the path is not a simple, straightforward and obvious one from the Ramah to the leniency here, but we do get to the same place. Bottom line, if the prohibited food is yavesh ke'etz, dry as a piece of wood, or in the words of the Mishnah Brura, dried like dust, then it loses its original prohibited status and can be added as an ingredient to the food. Well, you sense that we're beginning to move in the direction of gelatin. Now, let's go one step further. The Shach, one of the two principal commentaries on the Yoreh De'ah, Reb Shapsai Cohen was his name, 17th century Poland, printed in the outside margins of every standard edition of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shach says as follows, and again, you have the exact chapter and verse on the screen. I don't have to mention that. This is what he said. These are the words of the Shach. Kishenit yabesh ke'etz, if the food is dried out and is dry like a piece of wood, let ba'al luchit, if there's not a drop of moisture in it, no detectable emission. Of course, a chemist might tell you that there's H2O in it. We don't care what a chemist will tell you based on chemical analysis. When you look at it, your ordinary senses do not perceive any moisture in it. Sorry, that food becomes permitted. Why would you want to eat it? Well, of course, only unusual circumstances where you would want to eat it, like adding some musk to the food, or adding the stomach lining to the milk to make cheese. And under normal circumstances, who wants to eat a piece of stomach lining which is dry like a piece of wood? I mean, no one under normal circumstances would want to eat it, but it's okay. Yes, the Shach is indeed quoted frequently, but in this case and in many other cases is quoted by the Aruch HaShulchan. Okay. However, prohibited food which has been thoroughly dried should not be added lechatchila to a mixture. B'diavad, after the fact, if it fell in by accident, by mistake, or a non-Jew did it in food production, we have no objection to non-Jews preparing food however they want to prepare it. If it was, we should not add this ingredient on purpose to food. Uva artzot ha'elu, and in this area, he wrote this, he lived in Poland, in Eastern Europe. Kurkum is turmeric. It's in this part of the world, it's a very popular spice. Here in Israel, it comes from Southeast Asia. Indeed, in many of the languages in Southeast Asia, Vietnam is the principal supplier of kurkum, principal supplier of turmeric in Israel today. I don't know about where other countries import it from. In Vietnamese, the word for turmeric is simply the same as saffron. But saffron is extremely expensive spice, really delicious. A little bit of saffron added to the food goes a long way. It's really very good, but very expensive. Kurkum, turmeric, is very cheap and in large measure similar, very similar to saffron. You can tell the difference, but it's not a big difference between them. Turmeric is poor man's saffron. In any event, in Southeast Asia or wherever the turmeric is produced, it gets dried, yavesh k'etz, dry as a piece of wood. And indeed, here in Yerushalayim, you can go into the market in Mahane Yehuda, and you'll see the sacks full of turmeric, which you can take home yourself and grind into powder. It's very easy to grind it into powder, and many people like to do that themselves. It's imported in a way which is yavesh, dry as a piece of wood. Imkain, therefore, afilu yimatze chut basar yavesh. Therefore, even if the turmeric, which the non-Jews are selling here in Poland in the 17th century, even if there's some dried meat mixed in with the turmeric, it's all a powder, right? The turmeric has been ground into a powder, and maybe the desiccated meat has been added to the spice, even if the non-Jews are doing that, even if there is desiccated, dried out, non-kosher meat, which has been pulverized into a powder and is mixed with the turmeric, even if that's true, let ba, we don't care. It's fine. The non-Jewish meat, not properly slaughtered, maybe it's even pork, who knows, that has been totally desiccated, perfectly dry, and therefore the turmeric is permitted. We will not add the dried meat to the turmeric, unless the meat is kosher, of course. We will not add a prohibited ingredient to the turmeric, but if it happens by accident in our kitchen, or if the non-Jews did it, they can prepare food however they wish, then it's simply permitted, as we learned in the Ramah at the beginning of today's shiur. he applies the Ramah that we began with today about drying out the stomach to this case as well. The Ramah was talking about the stomach lining, which was dried out so that there's no moisture in it at all, and therefore was permitted to use together with milk. The same idea applies here, the Shach says. Correct, the Ramah permitted it lechatchila. The Shach is stricter than the Ramah. He permits it only b'diavad. The Ramah, the Shach, who is the stricter one, says if you're making kosher cheese with kosher slaughtered cow stomachs, that's okay. But non-kosher animal stomachs, lechatchila, should not be used for making kosher cheese. And the Ramah might very well agree with that. He didn't speak about that situation. The more contemporary poskim, led by the Darchei Tshuva, point out that there's a machlokas, a disagreement, whether or not the Shach is talking only about kosher animals or treif animals. Bottom line, most poskim permit b'diavad, even if the meat started out in a non-kosher animal, either due to improper slaughtering or gross anatomical lesions on the lungs or pork, a different species. Most poskim take the view that one should be strict. If the origin of the meat was non-kosher, one should be strict and not on purpose add it to the food, but b'diavad, all is going to be well. That's the majority view of the poskim. Okay, now here we have a lot of background, and at this point, we're going to turn to the Noda B'Yehuda, Rav Yecheskel Landa, 18th century, the Rav of Prague, and he was a gadol. His tshuvot are uniformly brilliant. His tshuvot uniformly make the most incisive analysis to whatever the issue at hand might be, and his incisive analysis of a huge number of issues had vast influence on the thinking of later generations. Let's see what the Noda B'Yehuda has to say about this issue. In the Shulchan Aruch, or Keva Heter. According to the Shulchan Aruch, we learned at the beginning of today's class, the dried, desiccated stomach of the cow turns into heter, something you're allowed to mix with milk. At what point in time could it conceivably have been prohibited? If there were a problem in making kosher cheese with kosher stomachs of kosher animals, if there were a problem, at precisely what point in time would we think there's a problem? Answer: Hitztarfo b'chalav, when the stomach lining is mixed with milk. Before you begin making the cheese, all it is kosher meat. The cow was kosher, it was slaughtered in the proper way, it was salted in the proper way, everything is correct until the milk was added. There's no room to think that there's any problem at all. If there would be a problem, the point in time where the problem would arise would be the point in time when the milk is added to the stomach. And if the stomach was dried before the milk was added, lo nishar bo tam, so there's no taste in the stomach anymore, no moisture, and it just tastes like a piece of wood, it tastes like dust, it has no taste anymore. Therefore, since there's no taste of meat because the stomach was dried, therefore there is no prohibition of milk and meat in this case. Okay, so if we start with something kosher, like the stomach of a properly slaughtered cow, it's permitted. You can eat it as it is. It's been properly slaughtered, it's soaked and salted, everything correct. Totally dried, now it loses its status, and now can be added to the milk. On the other hand, shal puchit, shal dag tameh, if you have a gland taken from a non-kosher fish, a shrimp, a crab, if you have a gland taken from a non-kosher fish, tamehu, that gland was always prohibited. Hu asur min Torah. There's been a Torah prohibition from the moment it existed. Kvar chal alav shem isur. The status of being prohibited existed before the mixture was made. Eno nifka memenu al yedei sheyityabesh ad sheyityabesh shelo yeh roi lekelim. Drying it is not enough to remove the prohibition. It must be dried so thoroughly that even an animal would not eat it. Now you notice that the Noda B'Yehuda has introduced two different levels of drying. There's a simple level of drying, which eliminates the halachic status of the food if the food started out being kosher. The kosher stomach lining has to be dry. Then it loses its status of flesh, loses its status of basar, and you can add it to the milk. That's because we started with something that was kosher. On the other hand, if you start with something which is not kosher, something from a pork, or an improperly slaughtered cow, or a crab, or a snail, it starts out life being prohibited. Here, simple drying is not enough. It must be so dry that it is no longer food in any sense. It is not food in any sense. That means not even an animal would eat it. Those are the two levels of drying in the thinking of the Noda B'Yehuda. And once he has given us this analysis, this is the analysis which subsequent generations of rabbis embrace. If you're talking about kosher cheese production made from rennet, from kosher slaughtered animals, it's enough ordinary desiccation, ordinary drying, and that's what's used in commercial cheese production today, in kosher cheeses. Incidentally, in order for this to work, in order for cheese manufacturing to be kosher, if you think about it for a moment, the kashrus of the cheese depends entirely upon whether or not the stomach was at some point prohibited before it was dried. That's a complicated way of saying that if you do not rely upon the shechita and the internal examination of the animal, you prefer another rabbinical supervision for the kashrus of the meat. If you do not rely upon the rabbinical supervision for the kashrus of the slaughtering of the animal, then you are holding that the stomach lining is prohibited. You would not eat the stomach, and therefore the stomach was prohibited for you even before it was dried out, and the cheese, which is finally made out of that, is unacceptable for you. If, on the other hand, you approve of the supervision on the slaughtering of the cow, and you would have no objection to eating the meat, you would eat the stomach if it was properly cooked up, I suppose, then drying the stomach eliminates the prohibition and it can be used to make cheese. Well, of course, there are many hechsheri, many rabbinic organizations out there, and if you accept this or that hechsher, then the cheese made from those animals is acceptable for you. If you reject the meat from this organization or that organization of rabbis, then the cheese made from it should be equally prohibited for you. That is the conclusion of the Noda B'Yehuda, and that is the position which is embraced by most contemporary rabbis today. I think all contemporary rabbis. Let's see how this plays out in more recent tshuvot. The Hartzvi, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim back in the days of Rav Kook. He was a close friend and colleague of Rav Kook, and unlike Rav Kook, who, as you probably know, was unfortunately a very controversial figure, for some reason not entirely clear to me. There are many rabbis who did not like Rav Kook. The Hart Tzvi, or Tzipras Frank, his close colleague and friend, who's more or less universally revered in rabbinic circles back in the middle of the 20th century. He writes about gelatin or other products which are made out of ingredients that are inedible. You dry the animal product. You dry the prohibited product in a way that it becomes inedible. Nifsal me'achilas adam, no one would eat it because it was dried out, and now it's like dust or a piece of wood. Mutar min Torah, the Torah prohibition vanishes. The ein isur derabanan ayadei tarovet, and therefore it can be mixed in with other food. Shaharei Chazal me'olam lo gazru al tarovet shel isur shenifsal me'achilas adam. Nowhere in the Mishnah, nowhere in the Gemara, nowhere in traditional rabbinic writings do we find a prohibition of mixing into your food an ingredient which is inedible. Chazal never mentioned that, and therefore Chazal never prohibited it, and therefore we cannot say there's even a rabbinic prohibition. And therefore, if the gelatin is made from animal parts, which are totally desiccated, totally dried, and just like a piece of wood or dust, then there's no prohibition to add it as an ingredient to other foods, and all is well. Afilo Noda Yehuda called Shenifsal Me'achilas Kelev Mutar Lechatchila, and the Noda Yehuda, the strict view here, holds that if it's not fit for even animal consumption, if what was originally a prohibited ingredient is no longer fit even for animal consumption, then even the stricter views are lenient and hold there is no problem. Okay, that's all the background. Now we're going to come to practical applications. And I personally find the practical applications, as they appear in the words of the great poskim, somewhat surprising. Let's go through them one at a time. First, I'm going to begin with the Minchas Yitzchak. Minchas Yitzchak was Dayan Weiss, Dayan Yitzchak Weiss. Originally, I always forget the name of the town he came from in Eastern Europe. It's either Grosswardein or Kleinwardein. I always get those two towns confused. He survived the Holocaust, ended up as a dayan, a rabbinical judge in Manchester, England, and then was called to Yerushalayim, where he became the head of the Edah Haredit, the ultra-Orthodox, what the Jerusalem Post calls the ultra-Orthodox faction in Mea Sha'arim, putting him at the very pinnacle of the strictest poskim in the Ashkenaz world, probably in the world. So we're talking here about one of the all-time great Machmirim, one of the great strict poskim in general. Let's see what he has to say about this. First, I'll give you the background of the tshuva that we're about to quote from. The question to which we're about to read the answer, the question was asked by Rav Schlesinger. Rav Schlesinger was a Rav of the Edah Haredit, of the came from Mea Sha'arim, and he got a job as a Rav in France, in Strasbourg, in France. And being a Rav in Strasbourg, in France, he was responsible for a lot of kashrus in France in the middle of the 20th century. And as part of his duties, among the places that he supervised was a sausage factory just outside of Strasbourg, a Jewish kosher sausage factory. And he, of course, made regular visits. Well, that's not true. He made irregular visits, not announcing his arrival. He made surprise visits to the sausage factory to look around and make sure that everything was being done correctly. Upon one of his visits, he asked the foreman, the minahel, the man in charge of the work. He asked the man in charge of the work. He asked the foreman, "Tell me, where exactly do you get the red coloring agent? Where does the red color come from that you add to the sausages?" And the foreman in the factory says, "Well, we use the same red coloring, which is used in sausage factories all over the world as one world standard of red food coloring. And it's made from crushed insects from the island of Majorca. In the island of Majorca, they raise these insects by the million, kill them, dry them in the sun, crush them into powder, and that red powder from these insects gets exported to sausage factories all over the world, and that's what we use to color our sausages red." Well, Rosh Leisinger was not happy to hear that. He's talking about Tseva Ma'achal Miyutzah Mishratzin, red food coloring, which is just crushed, pulverized insects. And he asked the Minchas Yitzchak, "Do I have to cancel the hechsher for the factory? Do I have to make a big fuss over this, or is it okay?" And the Minchas Yitzchak, the head of the Eidah Charedis in Mea Shearim, said, "It's okay, don't get excited, there's no problem." And there are three reasons why it is acceptable to use the bug juice as a red food coloring. I remember when I was a boy, um, uh, we used to be given, as a boy, we used to be given bug juice. Well, what was bug juice when I was a boy? It was water that had some red food coloring added to it and some sugar. Right? Sugar and red food coloring was called bug juice. Well, of course, what we were given as children was made from synthetic dye, real bugs, but historically speaking, it's the bugs which were used as a food coloring agent, and bugs to this very day are still used as food coloring agent in foods, and it's a big export item on the island of Majorca. Well, here are the three reasons why it's okay and you don't have to get excited. First, there's a double doubt here. And when you have a double doubt, two reasons why something might be permitted, even though each reason is shaky by itself, when you have two reasons for leniency, well, there's really no problem. And here are the two reasons. Dilma chazusa lav milsa. The bug powder, the desiccated powder of the bugs is not being added for taste. It's only being added for the coloring. It changes the color of the product, but not the taste. And that's a reason for leniency, since the prohibited element is not contributing a taste to the mixture. V'itim tzaloma da'avi milsa. And if you want to tell me that reasoning is wrong, and still it should be prohibited, there's another reason for leniency. Dilma have achar shnei masar chodesh. Maybe the drying of the bugs in Majorca occurred more than 12 months ago. Maybe more than 12 months elapsed between the drying of the bugs in Majorca and the addition of the powder to color the sausage. Maybe 12 months out of 12 months? What does that have to do with anything? Well, I tell you, it's well established in the poskim that insects, prohibited insects, which are dried like powder, and 12 months have elapsed in that state, the insects lose their prohibited status. I'll give you one example and you'll understand how it works. Consider for a moment sesame seeds, which are infested. No doubt about it. The sesame seeds are infested. Let's talk about a batch of sesame seeds which are infested. No doubt about it. The sesame seeds get sprinkled on top of dough, over bread, and they get put into the oven. The Chochmas Adam says, and this is the opinion embraced by subsequent poskim, since the sesame seeds are on the top of the bread, exposed to the heat of the oven, the sesame seeds, the insects which are mixed in with the sesame seeds, are going to get dried out in the oven. That's the same as 12-month drying period because of the heat of the oven, and therefore, even if the sesame seeds were clearly infested, the bread is going to be permitted. And today, in Yerushalayim, no one bothers examining the sesame seeds in the commercial bakeries, which are going to be sprinkled on top of the bakery products, because the heat of the oven will desiccate, will dry out any insects which might be there. This, of course, doesn't help for a filling in a pastry. Poppy seed filling in a pastry would not be saved by this process, but anything which is exposed to the heat of the oven. Indeed, what many people do is first they will put the poppy seeds or the sesame seeds, whatever they are, on a baking tray all by themselves, put them into the oven for a while and bake them. That's like 12 months have passed, totally dried out, and now become permitted. That's the first reason why the Minchas Yitzchak permits the bug juice to be added to the sausage. You take the powder, mix it with water, add it to the sausage. That's the first reason, first of three reasons why it is permitted. We're going to pause at this point. Next week in Yetz Hashem, we'll see the other two reasons why it is permitted, and then we'll see how this applies in similar situations. Until next week, I wish you a good week and eventually a Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing you all again a week from tonight. Shalom, shalom.